Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Catholic Truth Podcast. Today, we have another Catholic convert from Protestantism, non-denominational Baptist, church-hopping Protestant, back to the Catholic Church. And his name is Joshua Yen, and he's going to be sharing with us his story. Thank you for joining us, Joshua. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about, before we figure out why you became Catholic, of all religions in the world, tell us about what you were. How did you grow up and what church were you a part of?
So I grew up in Hong Kong. I had wonderful parents. They brought me up in a Baptist church back in Hong Kong called the Kallen International Baptist Church. They've always been focusing on that sola scriptura side. That's always been a very strong emphasis, as we know in the Baptist tradition, always focusing on scriptures, returning to scriptures. And during that time, I was always in and out of faith, if that's a good way to put it out. There'll be times in my life where I'll be, yes, let's all go to worship. I feel wonderful in this church experience. And then there'll be times where I've kind of left faith, or at least my passion for faith has dwindled during high school. And then when I was around 16, I actually came back to faith, or at least got a bit stronger in my Christian journey, purely because of actually a strange interaction with a Catholic at that time, which was quite negative, and that actually forced me or prompted me to become a more radically Protestant and more radically anti-Catholic, actually. And that anti-Catholic sentiment kind of stayed until I went to university. I was developing in the faith and in the Protestant tradition. And then after that, I went to Oxford and I came here and I was like, I need to find a church now. And I was kind of shocked by the fact that a lot of churches here weren't done with much reverence. I felt almost even more disillusioned by some of the, I'm not sure what's the best way to put it, but almost the Pentecostal, of course it's not Pentecostal, but it's Anglican in denomination, but a very low Anglican church, where it's a lot about, oh, let's receive the Holy Spirit, let's kind of make it so much like a show, where I started feeling a bit concerned about that.
Kind of like a charismatic Anglican type thing.
Exactly. That's precisely it. And I went to a few other churches, but I didn't really feel too much at home there. I felt there was something missing. And during that time, I had a few good friends. I do philosophy and theology at Oxford, and I had a few friends in my course who were Catholic, and we started having discussions about the Catholic faith. And one day they said, why don't you come to Mass with us? So I went, and I thought, wow, this is just something completely different. I felt a deep sense of peace, deep sense of awe and respect. And that kind of drove me into attending Mass weekly and continuing those conversations with Catholic Oxford per se. And that really led me to convert and become a Catholic around 2 months ago.
Yay. Congratulations. Welcome home.
Thank you.
So when you were back at those churches, you said some of them were anti-Catholic and kind of caused you to become anti-Catholic. Can you go more into detail about that?
I believe there's always a misrepresentation or a view of Catholicism within Protestant tradition, which is rather unfortunate. I think part of it is unfortunately done by Catholics misrepresenting their faith and done by poor interactions with Catholics. For example, one of the reasons why I was so anti-Catholic in the past was because I was interacting with a Catholic who I just felt was very arrogant, very prideful, who never really acted based on a Christian or a Catholic teaching, but nonetheless claimed that he was Catholic and was very loud about, oh, I'm Catholic, I'm an altar server at my church, I'm this kind of representative of Catholicism, yet never really represented the faith in its truest sense. So I think kind of that expression and interaction with Catholicism is unfortunately magnified and jumped upon by a lot of Protestant churches. So they view those certain individuals or those certain parts of people who call themselves Catholics as the representation of the faith. And as a result, a lot of people view Catholicism as this kind of heretical approach to just, all you need to do is attend Mass, eat some bread, who you call the blood of Christ, and then you get saved. It's a very watered down straw man presentation of the Catholic faith, which then is tied down to the Protestant laity, where they're like, oh, actually, the only intellectual, what I suppose I put that in kind of quotations, but the only intellectual version of Catholicism that they get is from their pastor, who they view as authority, who then says, well, Catholicism is just worshipping Mary and all these things, which is rather unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly. We'll come back to the pastor part in a second, but I agree with you. Like they'll say, "Oh, Catholics, how are you saved?" And they'll, "Well, I'm a good person," or, I try to be good, and try to help an old lady across the road. So, my good outweighs my bad. I'll probably get to heaven."
Hmm,
And so it's like that's literally not the gospel, and you literally can't
hmm,
get to heaven on your own. But yet Catholics have no idea what they believe sometimes when we're talking to the worst of the worst Catholics. And so, Protestants, I agree, can have a misunderstanding and a misconception, a big one of Catholicism, and or they'll be like, why do you pray to Mary? And a Catholic who's never been asked that and really doesn't practice or know their faith very well might just be like, oh, well, because she's close to Jesus. And, if you can't get what you want from God, then you just ask Mary. And it's like, ew, no, that's like not how it works, but so that would make like a Protestant's hair on the back of their neck stand up, like cringe. I think Catholics not knowing their faith and giving terrible answers, or, oh, I'm a Catholic, I was an altar boy, or I went to religious education growing up. And, I believe that you can do this with your body or do that, if you truly love someone. And they just give really bad answers and it makes Catholics sound bad. Whereas we're basing Catholicism on the worst of the worst. Ray Comfort is an expert at that. Ray Comfort's like a street
hmm.
evangelist who thinks that by interviewing Catholics who have no idea what they believe and have never really been inside of a church in like a decade, that, oh, well, this is Catholicism. And he constantly misportrays Catholicism that way. So it's really sad, actually.
Hmm. And I do think it is almost a universal problem within the church, where you see a lot of people, a lot of converts I do talk to, is they often have this impression where actually their catechesis process wasn't as perhaps as fruitful or as in depth as needed. And of course, it is almost a question that each priest has to kind of do the catechesis to the level of the people they're teaching. But once again, I think I was very lucky to have a brilliant catechesis program in Oxford. I'm not sure whether that's just because it's at Oxford and the priests are kind of forced to do it at a level where the students at Oxford are actually kind of capable of interacting with. But I do believe it really just stresses the importance of good catechism, that sometimes the best way to present our faith is to have that that knowledge of our faith and what we actually believe in.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we started Catholic Truth, is because catechesis has been abysmal in the Catholic Church for the last 40 or 50 years or so. And so, I mean, that's all been reformed and is being reformed as we speak, but and a lot of it is being reformed. But, we've had generations of uncatechized Catholics who have just stopped going to church and yet think they're the bee's knees, as we say here. They think they're the best Catholics in the whole world. It's like, oh, I went to
Mm.
Catholic school, until sixth grade. So clearly I'm an expert on Catholic. I hear this all the time. But maybe you could talk about did your pastors preach anti-Catholicism from the pulpit in those churches at all?
I would not say they preach necessarily anti-Catholic teachings, though they're at the same time it didn't stop them from making digs at Catholicism. I often made a joke to my friends that it would not really be a Baptist sermon if there wasn't at least one dig at Mary, or one dig at icons, or one dig at, I don't know, tradition or something. I haven't set through many sermons which don't include that. Though at the same time, I do believe when I actually talk to the pastors, because I back then I also had some kind of interaction with the leadership of the church. I was running some youth programs at the church as well. There was kind of a deep-seated disagreement and dislike of Catholic teachings within some of the pastors, some of the people working on the teams of these churches, and one can only see how that naturally would then just spread down from the leadership to some of the teachers, the Sunday school teachers, and then to the children, or to the laity in the Protestant community.
And if you were so anti-Catholic, then how and why would you go to a Catholic church just because someone invited you?
I have to say, I have absolutely no clue how that occurred. I think it could have been because one of the people, I was actually interested in one of the girls who was Catholic at the time, and that's the honest answer. But I went one time and I was like, okay, there's something really special about this. And I think what really changed my mind in this situation was the real presence of Christ, and it was the teaching that Christ was really present in the Eucharist. And at the time, going to a completely new country, I've never studied abroad. I was feeling somewhat lonely and somewhat, I suppose abandoned is not necessarily the right word, but I was in quite an existential crisis for one sense. And I came to learn about the real presence of Christ, what they meant by the real presence, and it brought me so much peace to know that when I'm at Mass, I can trust and be fully certain that Christ is there. Of course, Christ is omnipresent, God is omnipresent, but that there really is the corporal presence of Christ in the Eucharist was something very, very beautiful.
You must have had some big discussions about that in order to come to that conclusion. Did you guys discuss it a lot, you and your friends?
Yes, we had some really wonderful conversations, not only about transubstantiation, but also more structural, systematic questions about, well, what is the role of the Church? How do we believe in tradition? What are some of the implications of the Catholic faith, and what are some of the implications of the Protestant religion? And in both of these discussions, I was really challenged by some of these ideas presented in Catholicism, and really made me reflect. And it led me to a few conclusions, but mostly one of the reasons why I decided to become Catholic was I just realized Protestantism just had to be wrong. And one of the reasons for that was, well, we always think about on this, and you shall be called Peter, and on this rock I shall build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. When you think about the Protestant picture, it's very much a situation where it seems to me that the gates of Hades have prevailed against this church, because number one, if the church has fallen that far from the truth, such that the Reformation is needed, and all this Protestant kind of theology is needed to completely revitalize and redevelop the whole church, then, well, it would seem that if the church got the doctrine so wrong for like a millennia and a half, then surely the gates of Hades would have prevailed against it. So I think the importance and the truth found within the church was something which I was slowly convinced through my discussions with my friends of the necessity of Catholicism and tradition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, even if you decide Protestantism's right, it's kind of a self-defeating argument, because then you have to say, well, what kind of Protestantism? Is it the Lutheran or the Calvin or the Zwingli or the Knox or it's like they all disagreed with each other. Even from day one, they condemned each other. I just did a whole video recently on how Luther and Zwingli literally thought each other was Satan and accused each other of not being of the Spirit of God, but of the spirit of Satan. Like, those are really strong words, but they pretty much demonized anyone who was not on board with their own theology. And most Protestants, ironically, are not on board with Lutheran theology. Otherwise they would be Lutheran. So either God did use him or he didn't, and if he did, then he's probably correct. He should be Lutheran. But if not, I don't know. It's just kind of a big mess in my opinion. But I agree with you about the gates of hell. The gates of, why would God? It's the same argument Mormons make. Oh, God just let his church run in darkness for 100 years before Joseph Smith revived it and kind of brought back the truth. Jehovah's Witnesses around the same time. Catholic Church just, ran rampant for 1,800 years. And then, thankfully, our modern day prophet, Charles Taze Russell, came and he kind of revived the truth. And all of these people have this revival, Protestantism isn't much better, I don't think, personally. 1,500 years. God just let his church go for 1,500 years. Oh, well, there were always true believers. There were always people there, holding out the truth against the Roman Church, but I just don't like that argument, because it's all hearsay. It's nobody can ever give me any name. Well, who were these people? Can you name any of these people in the 900s, in the 600s, in the 400s, in the 200s? Like, who were these people? There's just this, that people just repeat it, but there was no other church. No one's ever given any evidence of that. And then if they do have evidence of that, it's usually like, oh, well, the Waldensians or, the Paulicians, and they start naming these random heretical sects that happen to oppose the Catholic Church, but they were heretical sects. Like the Paulicians, they actually were Gnostics who believed in multiple gods. And yet you have Baptists holding them up as true Christians. It's kind of weird.
Definitely. Though at the same time, I sometimes do think that when we look at the Protestant Reformation, there are things where the Catholic Church, I think I view the Reformation as, especially now that I'm doing a paper on it, it's a very interesting period, because there are things within the church which needed revitalization and did need changes. And I think sometimes it is difficult for us, at least with some confessional bias, to say, well, okay, there was no problem, or either on the other hand, there was completely 100% problem, but rather it's unique to look at it and say, well, actually, in the Reformation, there were times and things that needed to be developed. Not necessarily that the doctrine being preached was wrong, but rather the expression in the actual implementation of the doctrine was not done very well. And there were things that the church did learn from Luther, and indeed did very well after that. They reinforced the things like what do we mean by indulgences, and how the sale of offices and things at Trent and after, and these things were very good in revitalizing the church. So I think, in fact, it's too kind of simplistic to just view it either as 100% good or 100% bad, but rather there's a lot of things which can be learnt from the process.
100%. I just feel like, I think Martin Luther had great intentions. I think he was a good man with a good heart, just not the right man for the job, because
yes,
he just is very too pig-headed, too stubborn when he ran into the problems. I mean, I don't know who was more stubborn and pig-headed, him or the Pope, or the bishops that he was trying to speak to, because they were both pig-headed. But, that only caused Martin Luther to get angry. And, so he kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater and be like, oh, the Pope's, what do you call him? The snout on a pig. He called him like all these just heinous, gross words, and the Antichrist. And, it's like, if you run into problems, you don't get angry. You just pray and, try to fast and try to continue to fix those problems. But my thing is, it's sad that he just went off the deep end, and it took other people like Francis de Sales, John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, Edward the Confessor, and countless other actual reformers who brought sweeping reforms throughout the religious life, throughout the church. And, it's just sad. The Protestant reformers had good intentions. It just didn't work out as much as I don't think they would have expected.
Yes, and a good example of that, I think, was Cardinal Kallen at the time was actually writing his own kind of criticism of the practice of indulgences prior to Luther, and Luther just kind of beat him to it and made a very big fuss out of it. Whereas if Kallen actually presented the ideas in a proper fashion, probably Luther would have not even said anything and have actually agreed with the Catholic position on it. So that there are kind of unique aspects of the Reformation, which are fascinating to look at. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, for sure. We should have a whole video sometime on just the Reformation, because it is a very interesting time period. In fact, I have like so many books on the Reformation, but one in particular, I don't know if I can find it. This one by Hilaire Belloc. He's a historian, and I think he goes through like like a different chapter for each and every person, like Calvin, Luther. And it kind of, because every one of them has a completely different story with different viewpoints and that sort of thing. So it's kind of good to see the history of each of them, but we digress. So you talked to your friends, you became convinced of the truth of the Catholic Church. Did you have to do a lot of research on your own, in addition to talking with your friends?
I would say that I did some research on the topic. I did a lot of thinking and meditation on the topic. I attended a lot of adorations just to kind of pray and reflect and meditate on what was going through my mind. In some senses, I don't feel that theological research is the heart of my conversion, partially because I feel if theology is the reason for why people get saved, then it doesn't make it fair for those people who perhaps don't have access to as much resources as someone like me at kind of Oxford. I'm studying philosophy, theology. Theology is kind of down my alley and everything's kind of good in that sense. But sometimes what I appreciate most is I just have a beautiful picture of one of the times I was attending Mass at the Oratory at Oxford. It's actually where J.R. Tolkien also attended ages ago. And we had and there's always an elderly gentleman who walks in with his cane and goes to Mass. And that's just, to me, the most beautiful expression of the Catholic faith is the faith that someone who's perhaps not physically as able as we are to walk to Mass and kind of do everything in such an easy way, I suppose, a carefree way, but to have that devotion, that love for the Eucharist, for God, is something which is so beautiful and unique. And in some sense, I was trying to focus, at least myself, on kind of the spiritual influences and my thoughts about why Catholicism had to be true systematically, which then led me to my conversion. Of course, the theology kind of came with it, but I would say I tried to focus more on the kind of the broader systematic systems than necessarily the individual theological movements that could have been helpful, I suppose.
And you came into the church this past Easter, correct?
Yes, indeed.
Nice. And how was that?
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. I mean, it was magical because I got received into the church at the Oratory, and I don't know, I've always been a Tolkien fan. So just that the fact that I got confirmed into the church where Tolkien used to worship was, I don't know, just I guess as a Tolkien fan, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just kind of cool for the Tolkien lore, I guess. But no, I mean it's been wonderful, and it's brought a lot of peace since then, which I really enjoyed and really treasure.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Did you have any, thoughts that you wanted to share with anyone before we go? Anything that, you want to share with your viewers, Catholic, Protestant, whatever's on your mind?
I do think an interesting thing which does come to mind is just focusing to have good conversations, good loving conversations with people, and having an open mind to other viewpoints. And I think that goes to Catholics and Protestants alike. I don't think without the charity shown by my kind of Catholic interlocutors at the time, I'm not sure whether I would have come as strongly to the Catholic faith or as quickly to the Catholic faith. And likewise, if I was more open and perhaps curious about interacting and engaging with these topics ages ago, when I had kind of an interaction with perhaps a Catholic who was not really presenting the faith very well, maybe if I was more open-minded, then I would have wrestled with these issues earlier, because I do think some of these questions, like the question on scripture, like the question of tradition, are somewhat self-evident the more you actually think about these things. And as a result, I think just having an open mind is just so important, and having these discussions, looking for these discussions. And fortunately, there's a lot of these materials open on YouTube. I think Catholic Truth, you guys have a very good channel. There's a lot of really wonderful Catholic channels, and also a lot of good Protestant channels as well. I sometimes listen to Gavin Ortlund, I think, at the Truth Unites thing. I just, to have that different perspective is just something which is, I think, a very wonderful and a useful thing to do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And do you have a good community of friends now that you can, of Catholic friends in the area?
Yes, I have to say, if you're Catholic and you want to choose a university in the UK, Catholic Oxford is just a completely different place. It's a different animal. There's something for everyone, but if you're looking for something intellectual, Catholic Oxford is absolutely marvelous. If you're looking for a group of really good people, Catholic Oxford is also marvelous. So, I mean, if anything, I'll just say Catholic Oxford has been one of the greatest blessings to my life, I have to say.
That's great. Amen. And yeah, thank you for sharing your story today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. And thank you all for watching. And thank you all for listening to another Catholic convert. We have so many. If you like this story, check out our other ones in our guest interview playlist folder. We have a ton of conversion and reversion stories that will inspire you. And some of them are crazy, like insane, like just like a movie, but they're very, very good. And everybody's different. Everybody comes from a different place. And I hope that this has inspired people to learn, to wrestle, to grapple, not to just take the worst of the worst Catholics or even the worst of the worst Protestants and say, oh, look, Protestantism. I mean, it's so easy to do, especially with online people who don't know anything. Oh, you just have to go by what's in the Bible. Don't even go by, anything outside the Bible. Like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, your opinion that you just gave me is outside the Bible. So if we're going to take that literally, then I don't even need to listen to that. But just theologically, people who say, I could say, oh, look, Protestantism, they have this terrible theology. And yeah, many Protestants do. But I also understand that that's not the majority of Protestants, or I at least understand that that's not traditional Protestantism. Traditional Protestantism would probably also reject that, so, we probably don't want to pigeonhole people unfairly, or, and if you really want to know what Protestants believe, then, study the documents, study their Westminster Confessions, study the Reformers' writings. Same thing with Catholics. If you want to know what Catholics believe, watch our YouTube videos, read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, pick up good books about what Catholics really believe by Karl Keating, or Catholicism versus Fundamentalism by Karl Keating. I mean, there's no sense just making straw man arguments, setting up a straw man, knocking it down, and then patting yourself on the back that you could knock a fake person down. Like, anybody can do that. But can you grapple with the facts? And I want to challenge everybody out there to do that, even Catholics. We shouldn't be having low-level learning, especially Catholics. We have an extensive, probably the best extensive educational system in the history of the intellectual system in the history of the world, like just the university system and everything we created. We shouldn't be stooping down to non-intellectual, shallow, sophomoric arguments. So just a thought, just a challenge. If you ever have any questions, of course, you can put them in the comment section below, and you can, there's a link in the description section below as well. So check that out. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, whatever you want, all down below in the description section, and support us on Patreon and PayPal. Thank you all for watching, and God bless you.
Hi everyone, my name is Kate. I'm the video editor here at Catholic Truth, and I just wanted to say on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for taking some time to watch our videos and learn more about your faith. You guys really make this channel possible, and we truly appreciate you being here. So thanks again, and God bless.